First, dying with dignity or state-sanctioned killing. A confronting choice awaits voters on election day to vote yes or no in the referendum on legalising assisted dying. We will hear from ACT leader David Seymour, who has been the driving force behind the legislation, and from palliative care specialist Dr Sinead Donnelly, who is warning against it. But first, those who it impacts most, people facing an early death. Former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Sir Michael Cullen is in the yes camp. He was diagnosed with cancer after going to the doctor for a heart checkup.
They saw something a little bit strange on your liver, so he wanted to do another scan. And they said, well, your liver's, riddled with cancer. We don't know what sort it is. So then they took a biopsy, and then they came back and said, small cell lung cancer, the same as Helen Kelly had, with the secondaries in the liver. And the oncologist said to me, well, if you don't have any treatment, you've got 6 to 12 weeks to live, which is sort of a bit of a shock. I mean, it's inoperable. They can't cut bits out. There's too much, it was too much all over the place. And it's incurable. I mean, they can't actually get rid of it all. But I had 4 rounds of chemotherapy. The last scan that was taken showed basically couldn't see practically anything on the lung and a few sort of spots in the liver. What we do know is that the cancer will come back. What we don't know is how long that will take. Prognosis is I'm going to die a lot earlier than I was expecting to, but you just really don't have any idea. So you just get on with enjoying what you can.
But how confronting or how shocking was it? I mean, when you say you're going in for a heart checkup and you come out with incurable cancer?
Well, there's no point in getting angry. I said, I'm a bit teed off. I mean, I gave up smoking over 32 years ago. Now you tell me I've got lung cancer, and they said at the time, within 5 years you'll have lovely pink lungs, as good as new kind of thing.
You seem remarkably well at the moment. If you're so well at the moment, what are your reasons for supporting assisted dying?
I know that I'm going to, at some point, probably not in the very distant future, if I'm lucky a year, maybe a bit more, that's a good outcome. Where I'm going to go into this decline stage that everybody with small cell lung cancer goes into sooner or later. I'm going to reach the point where I'm going to be able to do very little for myself, that I'm going to become more and more reliant on various forms of painkillers and so on, and those sorts of things.
Pretty heavy. Yeah.
Pretty heavy, and you basically end up in a state where you're not really that much in contact with the people you want to be in contact with. My wife, my 2 children, my 2 stepchildren, 7 plus 1 all the way, grandchildren. But you want to be able to properly interact, not just sort of lie there while they say, I love you, Granddad, or something like that, which just bursts me into tears, so I don't want to be doing that. There's a lot of people saying, well, won't pressure come on? I think the most pressure comes on from within for most people getting to that sort of stage. You don't want people putting pressure on the person who's dying, but I think a lot of people want to have the choice. The bill is far from perfect, I think. Well, my main worry is that people will vote against it because it doesn't go far enough.
Right. It doesn't go far enough.
In particular, that it's got to be something which is definitely a terminal illness, which can be quite hard to determine.
Do you believe that there are enough checks and balances? Are you happy with the checks and balances that are in there?
I think the checks and balances are important at this stage. I mean, we're in the stage of let's see how this works, let's see how it goes. Will there be problems emerging? But if anything, I think with the amendments that came through in the committee stage, the Act is almost tighter than I think the majority of people seem to support.
If you choose to do this, you don't have to consult family.
No.
It's a personal decision only.
Yes.
Is that right?
I think that's right, but I think the vast majority of people would. I'm quite interested in my own wife's reaction to my diagnosis and treatment. From everything she said in the past, I thought she would be kind of, okay, well, it's good we've got enough time to sort of say goodbye, but it's quite clear now that she wants the longest possible time to say goodbye.
It's going to be hard for the public to vote on this because most of us are not confronted like you are with the mortality that's just been forced upon you.
Yes, I think...
So you have an insight that the public doesn't have.
I think a lot of people have thought about it, though, because it's an issue that's been in the public arena for many, many years now. I think if my mother had had a choice, she would have chosen to have taken that pill a few years earlier than she died, because the last 3 or 4 years were exceptionally unpleasant.
If the referendum passes and you meet all the criteria,
Yep.
would you consider assisted dying?
Yes, I would. I want to discuss it with Anne particularly first, and then other members of the family. But yes, I would.
So Michael Cullen. On the other side of the debate, Cambridge couple Ian and Penny Parsons. Ian has motor neuron disease. He is rapidly losing his mobility and has trouble speaking. Penny, who is a nurse, is now his full-time carer, and they are voting no.
Ian was teaching full-time music at St Paul's, weren't you? And I was working full-time in my nursing role. The kids had flown the coop, so when Ian retired, he had got a few symptoms going on, hadn't you? He had a bit of a tremor. That was the first sign. And he kept falling off things. And we wondered what was going on, didn't we? Then he couldn't turn the back door little latch thing. And then he couldn't turn the ignition in the car. On October the 19th, they summoned us back, didn't they, to tell us what they'd found. That was a horrible day.
And the diagnosis was what?
Motor neuron disease. Yep.
And when they gave you that diagnosis, did they tell you what to expect?
It's one of those real unknowns, because there's different types of motor neuron, and some people have rapid progression and some people don't. Everybody seems to think you're on a fast one, don't they? Yeah. Because when we moved into this cottage, Ian was still walking with a walking stick, and now, Ian, you can't walk at all, can you, unfortunately?
So in terms of facing up to, say, the end, nobody can tell you when that's going to happen, can they?
No.
Can they?
No. And you're pretty determined it's going to be a long way ahead, aren't you? Yeah.
What is it that makes you determined?
The kids. Yeah. Me. I'm not letting you give up, am I? Yeah. Lots to look forward to. I think, you know, we feel it's a robber, motor neuron disease. It robs the person of so much, but we've pulled things back out of it, haven't we? You know, things to look forward to and things to aim for.
What sort of things?
We've got to get through to next July, because we'll have been married 30 years. Yeah.
When it gets too hard, do you ever think to yourself, I would like a way out?
You've never said that, Ian, have you? No.
Some people feel that they are a burden on their family and would like to have that choice. What do you two think about that?
I think we're human beings, so we have all the, you know, the failings and idiosyncrasies. So we get tired, we get fed up. But the bottom line is, I've told Ian I'm not giving up on him. Dying naturally, a natural death, why isn't that more acceptable in our society? Why do we have to hide everything away and, you know, not talk about it?
Those who argue for assisted dying say it gives you the choice not to have your last months, years and days in a state of sedation. What do you say to that?
This is an advanced country, an advanced society, and I just worry that why can't everybody have access to the right care and support?
Ian, do you think there's a possibility that you could change your mind?
About assisted dying?
No. What would you like to say to people who are faced with that yes or no on election day?
I think we both would encourage them to read up about it properly, read the pros and cons, look at where the flaws are, because there are definitely flaws and there are too many loopholes. The vulnerable people are elderly, people with mental illness, you know, who think, you know, who's going to do the checks and balances for those people?
So what is it that's made you speak out now rather than enjoying the rest of your time?
I think I love this man, I love our family, and I think it's so easy, isn't it, to keep your head below the parapet and just, you know, do your life quietly and unobtrusively, which is what we've probably done, haven't we? And life is precious, time is precious, and we shouldn't squander it.
I love her.
I do love you, yes. And that's what it's all about.
So, Ian and Penny Parsons there, and I'd like to thank them and Sir Michael for sharing their stories with us. So how will you vote? Well, here to state their case and their concerns are ACT Party leader David Seymour, who sponsored the End of Life Choice Act. Thank you for coming in. And palliative medicine specialist Dr Sinead Donnelly, who initiated a petition of about 1,700 doctors against the legislation. Tēnā kōrero. Welcome to you both. Thanks for your time. David, first to you. We've got such a limited time on this earth. Why not stick around for all of it?
Well, I think that's a personal choice, and you know what I'd say to Ian and Penny Parsons, a challenging situation, but the option for them is don't choose it. You know, they have the option of not choosing it. This is a question of whether other people should be able to. And people find themselves in a range of circumstances. My namesake, David Seymour from Whangarei, also has motor neuron disease. He's quite clear from his point of view that he would like to have dignity and choice and control over how his life ends. I've travelled literally from Kirikiri to Gore campaigning for this law. I've heard the stories of New Zealanders who have seen bad death, and no matter how much people try to say, you know, just a bit more palliative care, it's going to be okay, they know what they've seen, and they want to have that choice and dignity and control because it's their life. It should be their choice. It's not up to others to tell them that they should stick around a bit more to fit someone else's morality. Well,
Sinead Donnelly, you are a palliative medicine specialist. You know as much as anybody what it's like to care for people in those end days. Is it humane to give these people the choice?
Well, we're about to vote on this particular act as it is now. That's what we're voting on. We're trying to determine, everybody has to determine if it's safe. Palliative care is all about caring for people and relieving suffering. That's what I do as a palliative medicine doctor. And I stand with the palliative care nurses New Zealand, Hospice New Zealand, and the palliative medicine doctors in New Zealand, all deeply concerned about the risks that this act has in it. Every day we look after people who are dying, people who are extremely vulnerable. While we were watching the Parsons family, David laughed. Now, I don't know what that laughing was about, but
well, we'll ask him in a moment.
I was more moved, you know, to tears hearing their story.
Yes.
So palliative, we're about caring for people. We can relieve suffering. Palliative care works. And we have to be conscious of all the risks entailed in any... You're not legislating for the David Seymour namesake person. You're legislating for Team New Zealand, for everybody in New Zealand. And potentially this will... about 25,000 people every year could come within the ambit of this as this act as it's written.
OK, well, we'll talk about numbers in a moment. What was the reaction to the Parsons piece that you took exception to?
There was a part there where they said, we don't know what the checks and balances are, that it's about the vulnerable, the elderly, people with mental illness. Those three categories are explicitly excluded in the legislation from being criteria that can enable you to have assisted dying. The checks and balances are rigorous in the law. The conversations, the checks, the processes that you have to go through are extensive. And if you go to the government website, referendums.govt.nz, and actually go through it as the Parsons suggests,
yes,
it becomes bleedingly obvious that anyone who was not competent, had been put up to it, or in any way wasn't sure what they were doing, could never navigate that process.
Okay.
So, and, having had 5 years of this, I have to say, I do get a little bit tired of people who say that they want everyone to read the law. But actually, once you read it, you'd find that the objections being raised are simply unsupported.
Okay, that might be the case for some people who aren't specialists in this, but Dr. Donnelly is, and you are concerned that there aren't the checks and balances.
Absolutely,
right?
it's a dangerous law.
It's a dangerous law.
Yep.
In what particular aspect does it make it dangerous?
Because I look at it through the eyes of a doctor who's caring for people, sometimes 24 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week, and all the other doctors who have the same view as I have. So, for example, we'll pick the issue of coercion.
Yep.
Even the College of GPs in New Zealand, in their submission to the Justice Select Committee, said that they won't be able to identify coercion. Coercion is like the pressure that a person might feel. It can even be internalised, it can be subtle, or there's pressure on the family, or they're under stress, or the inheritance, legal. I mean, you may.
So let me ask you this question, Dr. Donnelly. You are involved in decisions every day that have life and death consequences, whether to continue treatment, whether to give food and water, whether to turn on or off life-supporting machinery. Are you saying that you make those decisions every day without knowing if people are being coerced? Because if you can't, you shouldn't be practicing medicine. If you can, then you will be able to under this law.
There will be no way. The person who may request this can come to a doctor who doesn't know them. The second doctor who's to give their opinion will potentially come from the SCENS group. They won't know the patient
SCENS
either.
group is the group that was set up to...
They will come from the SCENS
That's
group.
right.
That's what the law requires.
Who will not know the patient.
And here's the next thing.
Who will all be pro-euthanasia doctors, because that's why they're on
there'll
the
be
group.
doctors who are professionals and part of your profession who have an obligation to read the person's notes, examine them, have a series of conversations over a period of time.
It actually says
and understand the decision that they're making. And understand the decision that they're making. And by the way, there are many doctors who have seen bad death and are in favour of this. So when you say you speak for all doctors, you don't.
Well, OK, let's talk about the checks and balances. So there are 2 doctors that have to be consulted.
Who don't necessarily need to know the patient.
But they need to have ongoing... hang on a second, David.
But that's very important. This is a life or death decision. This is a doctor going to end the life.
Hang on, David. Hang on.
Then there's prognosis, of which you certainly can't comment because you're not a doctor or a nurse or in the healthcare field. So prognostication is an estimate. And there's international literature research published, and we know it ourselves that we get it wrong most of the time, even within a few days of death. Families often ask how long have they got to live, and we generally say we're not sure, we don't know. So putting out to 6 months, it's not as if we plug in the patient's details into a computer and out pops the date of death, and then we calculate backwards 6 months.
So is that a problem with this particular legislation, that you were saying 6 months?
Well, no, it's not. Can we just come back to something Sinead said a second ago? I mean, the idea that no doctor can ever treat somebody if they haven't known them for a long time is absurd. Of course, doctors have a professional responsibility in general and under this law to read the files, to understand everything about the decision that they're making, especially under this law. The second thing I would say, this prognostication issue, yes, it's certainly true that people have miraculous recoveries. It's certainly true that you can't predict exactly when somebody will die. But remember, that prognosis is just one of 6 criteria as part of a long process. Now, if you feel that you're actually getting better, then you don't end your life. It's only when you're absolutely sure that you want to go that you make the choice. The prognostication is just to be eligible to make the choice. But, you know, Simon, I think that it would be a lot more respectable, instead of making up these kinds of what I call false objections, if Dr. Donnelly came here and said, this choice is against my religion, and I don't want other people to be able to make that choice. It would be a lot more respectable if he would say that.
It's disgraceful sectarian comment.
It would be.
Wait, hang on, David. We need to clear this up, please.
Yeah, I have 25 years of experience of palliative medicine working. I speak from a professional point of view. I'm an associate professor of palliative medicine, research and education, worked in 4 different countries. So I speak in that from that platform and that experience.
So,
and I deeply care for people. That's all I care about. 4 generations of doctors in my family. I care about people. I know that we can relieve their suffering through palliative care. Palliative care works. I meet people every day who say that they feel a burden, you know, an older person, outside even the palliative care sphere, just in general medicine. And an older person will say to me, "Oh, don't do much for me. I feel a burden." And then we try to look after them. Imagine introducing this, you know, flimsy, leaking legislation into that world where people... And also...
I feel like I touched a nerve there.
Yes, rightly so. This is about life and death.
Yeah, well, that's true. So, first of all, let's a couple of things here. Your objection is not based on faith.
It's completely based on my professional experience.
Right, so that's cool. Secondly, you have to take somebody at their word, David.
Of course.
That's bigotry at its utmost.
Secondly, can we talk about people who are poor and lonely and perhaps vulnerable? So that's what Penny Parsons was talking about there. Do you think, Sinead, that people who are, say, poor and lonely will have enough care or be able to get enough palliative care to make that kind of choice?
Well, what's amazing is that in Oregon, and the statistics they've collected is that there's one said that said 59% of people who requested the assisted suicide in Oregon, it was due to loneliness. You know, is euthanasia New Zealand's answer to loneliness? We're likely to go down the same route.
No, again, that's completely untrue and a total misrepresentation. In Oregon, yes, in Oregon, people have the ability to tick as many concerns as they may have, and most people tick quite a number. So if you added up all of the things that they tick, people would have 600 or 700% concern. And so, yes, some people do say that they feel lonely. A lot of people feel lonely at all times. But that doesn't mean, as she's just said, that 59% of people are doing it because of loneliness. That is another attempt to mislead the public. And this is why I say it would be more respectable if you argued on the facts.
OK. I mean, loneliness may be a factor for everybody, and our legislation does not say that loneliness can be a contributor or criteria.
Absolutely not.
But you say that it's a leaky law. Is there anything in this particular law that would change your mind? Or is there any way we can change this law that would change your mind?
Well, it can't be changed. We're voting on it on October the 17th. Right. That's it. Okay. That's what we're debating.
Hang on, David.
We're not voting on should we have more palliative care, should palliative care be a human right. We're not even voting on do we like euthanasia, do we not like euthanasia. We're voting on should this end-of-life choice, which is a euphemistic term for this legislation, be brought into force. It's a done deal. You know, 51% of people voting. It's in as it is, and it is exposing the vulnerable. And you have to see it through the eyes of those who work in this area, who give their life really in service to caring for people who are dying and who are at risk.
OK, so, I mean, do you think that the public understands that this is binding? Do you think that, you know, once they say yes or no, this is exactly what we're going to get?
No, they don't understand.
You don't think so? Do you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, first of all, you know, I've probably talked to more members of the public on this issue over the last 5 years than anyone. I've literally, as I say, travelled from Kerikeri to Gore, public meetings, hundreds of people up and down the country. Yep. I've heard the stories. People get it exactly. And also we do a lot of scientific polling where we ask people very explicit questions. Do you think that a doctor should be able to actively help end your life? And the overwhelming majority of people say yes, and then we ask them, are you going to vote in this referendum? And they say yes to that too. OK, but I should say that like the majority of submissions to the Select Committee were against this, weren't they? Oh, that's absolutely true. But what that shows is that in the digital age, if you run a good campaign, then you can get people to do things such as, you know, write an email to a Select Committee, and certainly that was achieved. But
so you don't believe that those submissions were represented?
Not remotely. Okay. They were reflective of people who wrote an email to the Select Committee the most part.
So Dr Donnelly, I mean, he doesn't believe the submissions that were to the Select Committee, but obviously you organised a petition against this.
Well, it's not really a petition, it's an open letter to New Zealand. Just doctors saying why they don't want to, the risks that they think, why they don't want to be part of it. And for doctors to actually stand up and comment on that in public is quite significant. It really reflects that people have a very strong opinion.
OK, can I quickly ask, is there sufficient palliative care in New Zealand?
No, there isn't.
There isn't. So if you're suggesting that palliative care should be the answer to help people with suffering at the end of days, how do we address that? Because is it a postcode situation like we have with cancer? Well,
there's definitely chronically underfunding of the palliative care services in New Zealand. Approximately 50% of services are funded through charity, like fundraising through bake sales and op shops. What other branch of medicine and healthcare requires 50% of its funding to come through that form of fundraising? That just shows you what we're not focusing on.
This is one area where we agree completely. But I just make the point that, you know, countries which have legalised assisted dying generally have better palliative care than countries that don't.
Why is that?
I think it's because they're countries that take the end of life seriously and they want to have all the options on the table. They respect the dignity of people at the end of their life. The only difference between Sinead and I is that I want people to be able to choose for themselves. She wants to take them down a route that she finds morally acceptable.
Last word to you.
The last word is that on October the 17th, you're voting on whether this End-of-Life Choice Act should be brought into force. Just like a jury, you need to decide beyond reasonable doubt that this is safe. And it's not a safe law. It's going to put vulnerable people at risk. You ask the experts in relation to the COVID, what do they think we should do? And we followed the public health experts. Palliative care doctors and nurses are the experts in this area, and they're saying no.
All right. Well, it's up to the public to decide on October 17. Thank you very much for your time, Dr Donnelly. Thank you for your time, David Seymour.
Thank you.
If you've got something to say about what you see on our show, please let us know. We are on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, or you can email us at nation@mediaworks.co.nz. Joining us on our Twitter panel this week are Tim McCready and Mark Thomas using the hashtag NationNZ. But still to come, we dissect the week's...